What I have here is a Harry Thomas special report. Today is Wednesday, February 6, 2008. And I was keeping an eye out for any kind of election problems in the county that I live in central New York. And I did find a couple stories that need to be reported on. This one came out of the Post-Standard in Syracuse, New York. Phone glitches frustrate Onondaga Elections Board callers. The Onondaga County Board of Elections was fully staffed all primary day, but for about 90 minutes the board's phone system left callers with a completely different impression. Those who rang the board between 4:30 and 6 p.m. were automatically thrown into the office voicemail rather than routed to a real person, apparently because of a programming glitch. Republican Election Commissioner Helen Kiggin said board workers had to retrieve the messages and call the callers back. We've got some nasty messages here, many of them centered on county workers closing shop at 4:30 on Election Day, Kiggin said. Now that there is just totally retarded. I mean, come on, one day of the year, 2 days of the year that your department needs to actually be functionable, and all of a sudden there's a phone glitch during the peak times. We're talking about right during rush hour, right when people are getting out of work, when they're getting ready to go vote and need information. Now this here just seems very, very, very suspicious, and we need to keep an eye out for this because there's people that are being disfranchised in this county. Now, this next story that I do have, there was a 2-vote difference in the Salina race for town justice. And George Alessio, the Democrat, is arguing that some voters in his town were disenfranchised by too harsh of an interpretation of state election law. Let's get into this.
It's come down to, at this point, a 2-vote difference.
The Democratic candidate for town justice, George Alessio, is arguing some voters in his town were disenfranchised by too harsh an interpretation of state election law. At issue, 7 absentee ballots. Voters are supposed to fill in circles. On these, there are check marks, circles, changes, and other marks that led both Republican and Democratic commissioners to reject them.
Contain extraneous marks, and the state election law says if a ballot has marks outside the voting square that we are not allowed to count those ballots.
Also uncounted were 3 affidavit ballots sealed Election Day in an extra envelope. They too were rejected.
Election is, again, one of the most fundamental processes of our democracy, and we want to make sure that everybody who has the opportunity to be heard for their choice for a particular candidate is heard.
It will now be up to Judge Deborah Karalunas to decide if votes are counted and which votes are counted. And that's where things could get interesting. The strongest case may be for counting the affidavit ballots, which were sealed in an additional envelope because of an apparent error by some elections workers. When those ballots were finally reviewed, 2 went for Republican Paul Carey, 1 for Alessio. Add them to the current vote totals, and Carey's lead increases to 3 votes. Then come the disqualified absentee votes. The judge could accept some, reject others, but if she rules that all should be counted, 5 would go to Alessio, 2 to Carey. And that would mean a tie vote.
That creates a vacancy, which goes back to the Republican-controlled town board, which will probably appoint Mr. Carey.
You know, I believed in the process and I went through it, and if in fact the court validates all those ballots and it turns out to be a tie, I'll feel comfortable with that result.
The race may finally end next Thursday. In Syracuse, Bill Kelly, News 10 Now.
Now, the discrepancies in this news article was this happened back in November, the November election, and it's taking all this time to figure out what to do with a few votes. I mean, I don't understand this. I mean, I call for the resignation of some of these incompetent people that are working at the Onondaga County Board of Election. I mean, first of all, they say they have election workers who made a mistake stuffing the envelope, stuffing affidavit ballots into an envelope, and then they can't even get their phone system right during peak hours on the primary election day? Come on now. Somebody is totally incompetent, or they're just plain corrupt. And this just goes about to what I was saying on the show last week about keeping an eye on the voter rolls, keeping an eye on the absentee ballots, and keeping an eye on what's going on in your area. And apparently there was a decision made by the judge in this case that declared a winner. This is what happened.
The final ruling is in from a state Supreme Court justice, and Judge Deborah Karalunas says Democratic candidate George Alessio is the winner of the race for town justice in Salina. Now, the race between Alessio and Republican Paul Carey has been the subject of a court battle since November, centering on uncounted absentee and affidavit ballots that elections commissioners had disqualified. Now, in the end, the judge allowed 3 absentee ballots to be counted, enough to give Alessio a 1-vote win. Now, that result is expected to be certified by the Board of Elections. Alessio will probably not don judicial robes for some time, though. Carey is expected to take an appeal to the State Appellate Division next month. Until their ruling, Justice Herman Harding, who had planned to step down, will remain in the job.
Now you see right there, apparently the judge decided to use 3 of the absentee votes out of the ones that were in discrepancy. I would like to know how the judge came to decide which of them absentee votes were valid and which were not, if they were all outside of the box, and by state law you're not supposed to be able to count them, according to the Republican Commissioner of the Board of Elections in Onondaga County. Now, also, how come the affidavit votes that were sealed in an envelope by mistake by a county worker, how come they weren't counted? Now, is it a state law that you can't count affidavit votes that are sealed in an envelope or not? Now, I will be following up with this by trying to get a hold of that judge and the county elections board to find out exactly what were the circumstances in which the judge allowed or chose to allow whatever votes she decided to. Now, the issue here seems to be that the state law says that anything outside that little tiny box, they're not allowed to count it by law. Do people even know this? I mean, when you see them boxes, you check a box, circle a box, X a box. You're always going outside that little tiny area. So pretty much anybody's vote is not allowed to be counted according to New York State election law because of this. I find this extremely suspicious, and especially with the phones going out right during rush hour on election day, there seems to be some kind of foul play going on here in central New York. I want to encourage everybody else to keep an eye on what's going on in their county, and any kind of discrepancies or any kind of problems should be reported. I want to thank you for listening, and together we will make a difference and take our country back.